Hey everyone, really excited about this conversation with Gigi Stone. Gigi is an incredibly accomplished news anchor from the US. Has been on NBC, ABC, Bloomberg, I think, CNBC, every one of the major networks in the world. Has spoken to several US presidents, has interviewed some of the world's business leaders. And I'm really excited to learn from her how we can become as successful, whether it's for social media purposes or following in her footsteps in the TV career, or actually just even communicating for our own business in terms of using press and using other channels. So I'm really excited about this talk. Listen in. I think conferences, even though old-fashioned in many ways, are still a highly effective way to actually do business, I think.
I think they're having a bit of a resurgence, actually, because everyone is hidden behind their computer and technology and doesn't have that kind of interaction in the social gatherings that they used to as much. And so I think there's more interest in conferences.
Absolutely. And so I've gone to Vegas a couple of times where I'll fly over, I'll spend 3 days there, and I'll fly back, and it's a lot of quote unquote wasted time in airplanes and everything else, and yet it's still worth it for me because for 30 hours, everybody it's spread all over the world is there. Everybody can be efficient. I don't have to fly. I mean, I save not having to fly to San Francisco, fly to New York, fly to Arizona, then fly somewhere else, and everybody's very willing. And at a conference, you can be very quickly in and out. So you can be like, let's sit down for these 15 minutes, let's talk, and we'll skip all the pleasantries because it's sort of quite a transactional sometimes thing, both good and bad. We'll get to know each other, and there's 15 minutes we've booked, and after those 15 minutes, I'll go and I'll do something. I'll go to the next meeting, you'll go to the next thing, and then we'll follow up on the things that make sense, right?
And when people are doing those Brella meetings, is it like they see someone they know or they see someone they don't know that they might be interested in knowing?
I think both, actually. It's a really good point. So I think you'll do both. But I built a company where I raised money from a bunch of companies, including the World Bank. And the World Bank, which ended up leading a 50 million round into the company, I met at a conference, right? And multiple of the investors that have invested in the companies actually have met at conference. I think I've met more people at conferences that have invested in companies I've founded than.
And just as a guest, not as a speaker. It's not like they were inspired because of that. But
to be fair, I don't go to a conference to say hey, I'm here. It's preparation work. I'll have somebody from my team look through everybody's attending. I'll find everybody I want to meet. I'll write them on the app that's being used, but I'll also write them on an email if that doesn't work, or on LinkedIn or whatever. So it requires, most people show up and say, hey, great, I'm going to network. And then they're like, who am I going to meet? And what's happening? Yeah, exactly. You're going to walk around. So if you're really well prepared, I think it's one of the most effective things you can do. I think it'd be highly ineffective if you're not prepared, like everything else in life. So that's the mindset. So what I want to create is I would like it to go from we're 2,200 people this year. My goal is to be 8,000 people, which is, to be honest, a completely arbitrary number. I guess any other number is in this world arbitrary. Yeah, but but that's really the goal, and then everybody should come. And I think the bigger you get, actually, the more platform, the more interesting it becomes for everyone. So I think it's a win-win. You can invest more in the experience. You get better speakers. You get better this and that, and so I think everything comes well together. And I'm so happy that so many people like yourself just want to sort of support the journey there, right?
It seems really interesting, and I didn't know about it. And you have a really good lineup.
Yeah.
You have really good speakers, and it's eclectic mix. It won't be boring because it's really different kinds of people on the same theme, but all with something to offer. So I think it's a really it's a good setup for if you're going to have to listen to speakers all day.
And I know you must have had the same trade-off in some parts of your career, which is this person is famous, but they're not going to really share any insights because either they don't dare to, they haven't structured their knowledge, whatever it may be, versus sometimes, and it doesn't have to be that trade-off, but sometimes you have the person who's maybe a little bit less known, but actually that person has a tremendous amount of knowledge to share. And that's a tough trade-off because in the past, President Summit has, for example, they've invited a lot of people who, because of their political status, whatever, couldn't share a lot. And haven't dared to push enough on let's get real content out. Whereas I would much rather have people go away with real knowledge, and I care less about how well known they are. They happen to be amazing. Benjamin Sander is a good example of somebody who's fantastic, who has that insight. But I think that's the important part.
He seems unbridled, so that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, absolutely. In interviewing famous people, they're by far the most annoying.
Yes.
They're super narcissistic. They have too many people that tell them everything they say is so funny and amazing and fascinating that they almost lose their inner gauge of what's funny or amazing or fascinating. So they tell long, boring stories and are laughing harder than anyone else. And
what do you do then?
They act like they're doing you a huge favor when you're thinking, you know what, I could really take or leave this moment. So
yes. And what do you do then? Because I guess you have a trade-off as a journalist, which is, look, I can be the person who's now going to pressure a lot, which means I may get more insights and information out that's really leverageable for people to use in their business or their context. Or I'm going to play the nice person, and that person who sits on the other side loves me because I'm this really kind journalist. You know, how do you balance that?
Well, my personal tactic that I will give away right now is I start with being really sweet and nice, and let them just, what the expression is, just get it out. Let them talk about whatever it is that they in their mind think this interview is going to be about. Get that part over with, and then come in for the real questions that we want to be answered by the end, when they're comfortable and they feel like they had control of the interview. Unfortunately, and this is actually what I tell my media training clients, no one has control of, no one can control what you say. No. Except you. So you're in control of what, you dictate. So, and the journalists can cut out whatever they want to.
And so how do you, let's assume now I have a couple of companies, and media training is probably relevant for someone like me. And you mentioned before, you have the what is the band, the group again called Pussy
Riot.
It's Pussy Riot. So I want to get it right. Pussy Riot. Thank you. Sorry, I know.
They were arrested.
Yeah,
in Russia.
I know. Russia. I remember. Yeah.
Tactics.
But you have groups like that. So let's assume you're sort of telling me that the high level, and I know this takes much longer than the time that we have. What should I think about in media training?
That's actually a good question. So the first thing is, it's about coming up with your story. Yeah. Who you are, what it is you want to say. You were saying how so many people aren't prepared. It's not that they're not prepared, it's they don't know what to prepare for. Yes. So I sort of give them a sense of how it's going to go. It's like you're dancing a waltz. You have two people, you both have moves, they want something from you, you want to give them something. Yeah. You have to realize that
Waltz sounds nicer than chess.
Right, exactly. Well, I feel like it is more collaborative, because the journalist wants to look good as well. Mm-hmm. People don't realize that everything you do and say, if you're being interviewed by the New York Times, is par for the course. So if you're being so pleasant to the interviewer and you answer the phone and are rude to your secretary, that can't go in the piece. The painting you have on the wall in your office, that can be described in the piece. So you have to be so conscious of everything that you're doing that's not as part of the interview. There's no such thing as saying off the record afterwards.
Do you have to write down that story, or can you just have it in your head? Is there an advantage to actually writing down how you want to be portrayed?
Oh, I absolutely think you write it down.
Yeah.
So we come up with your message together, and I will tell you, you know what, that part's boring. Yeah. Sorry, no one cares. Let's get to the meat of it. I almost think of it as the bouillon cube of the soup that you are. Let's get to the essence of what your company is, what your meaning is, and put it out there straight out of the gate. Don't waste any time. You don't know how short or long this thing is going to be. Yeah. So this is who I am. This is what I want to say. And this is what I want everyone to know about me.
And do you do that for that particular piece, or is it more like you lift it up a level and you actually do it so that story is coherent this year, next year, the year after, et cetera? So you actually think more broadly than just, do you need that overall red thread as well?
I think so in terms of longevity, you probably have to revisit, because everything, the only thing that's constant is change, right? Yeah. But in terms of, I think people think that every time they have to give a different answer when they're doing different interviews. And it's actually the opposite, because there's so much saturation of content. To break through the white noise, you have to have such a clear message that you repeat over and over again, almost like a politician on a stump speech. So, if you're a musical artist and you say your influence one day is this and one day is that, you want to create positive associations. People in their head, they have too much. We all have too much information, right? So they have to think, you your musical influence, oh, she's just like a mini Taylor Swift or whatever it
Yes.
is. So you have to be consistent with your message across the board. Or, that company, oh, yeah, that's sort of like, email encryption, but better because this,
Yes. I find that super difficult exactly for the reason that you just mentioned, which is there's a lot of content, which is also a lot of inspiration, and I get inspired a lot. And so you could pick me on 2 different days, and you may get 2 different answers. And that's not because I'm trying to deceive or anything else. It's just merely that I've got inspired in the meantime. But you're saying by writing it down and actually sort of committing to that story, it'll probably be more clear for the audience that, there's some consistency in what you're really saying.
Yeah, they have to have an association for you and what it
Yes.
is if you're trying to sell something. I mean, if you're a thought leader
Yes.
And trying to create change in the world, then yes, you can espouse your ideas. And
Yeah.
frankly, the European press, I think, is more open
Yeah.
to longer conversations and a little bit more nuance and intellectualism. Americans think in a very linear fashion, which is actually...
I don't know if that's so different here.
Oh, really?
I think you're maybe glamorizing it here. I think it's pretty the same everywhere in the world. It's in and out very quickly, and it's good and bad stories. Either you're the good guy or you're the bad guy, and it's like, they really want to write about everything that you were thinking about and what you understand, but actually they have so short time that they actually end up writing about a centimeter deep, really.
I guess it's global.
It is pretty much. I think the pressure is global
You
as
can't
well.
underestimate how busy and overworked the journalist is,
Oh,
right?
100%.
So if you actually hand them something and you say, look, this is the story, here's some questions you can ask me, you'd be
Yes.
shocked by how smoothly it can often go.
Yes. And so when you're writing that story, is there any tips and tricks you could give me as a leader or somebody else as a leader of the business or an employee of the business, but how to think about writing that story? Does it have to adhere to some greater good? Does it have to be really your own story? Do you have to be truthful? Can you fake it before you make it? I mean, are there any sort of rules around those things, you think?
I just think if you tell something personal,
Yeah.
it's so much more memorable. If you tell it in the form of an anecdote,
Yes.
if you explain the what drives you in an emotional way as opposed to just explaining the nuts and bolts of the issue, it's going to be so much more memorable. That's what sticks in people's minds. You can't get excited about someone else's sort of formulaic approach to business.
It's interesting I think writing it down, consistency, coming up with personal anecdotes. Are there other ideas and things that you think are key, sort of? And I know this is a very short version of everything you would go through in a media training with a CEO, for example, or something. But are there other key things that?
I definitely think you want to befriend your interviewer and not think of it as something as antagonistic. I think a lot of people are very defensive and feel like they're going to get caught. But like I said, there's no answer that they can make you give them. So you are in control of the situation. I think it's very human nature to be like, oh, is that right? Is that what you wanted?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
Did you give you the right answer?
Am I okay? Do you like me? Yeah.
So you have to take control. You
Yes.
seize control and you say, look, this is what I'm here to say. Even if they didn't ask you that question, you say, that's a really interesting question. I'm going to think about that. But you know what else that makes me think of? And you can always pivot.
You don't actually have to answer the questions as they're being asked.
Absolutely not.
Because that's one of the fascinating things is somebody asks, what's your favorite color? And, you can go on anything from that you want to.
100%. And also no one at home cares.
Yeah.
You're putting on a show, right? So everyone should look good and it shouldn't seem like it's some battle. Now there are certain kinds of journalists who want to create a battle, but I mean that's a whole separate category.
Yeah.
I call it media therapy because the truth is every case is so individual and people can talk to me for half an hour about one thing and then at the end we really get to what they're there for, but they didn't even realize it. So there are holes in everyone's story that they're trying to figure out. And sometimes just by talking it all out, it comes to them.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is like a emotional therapy.
And so you've done this now, TV and everything else, you've done this now for how long?
A long time.
Okay, sorry.
I like to say more than a decade, but it's a lot more. So I have actually worked as a reporter and anchor at ABC News, CBS News, NBC News. So those are the three major networks in the United States. and Bloomberg Television.
Yes.
Which was like such a wonderful experience because that brought me into the business world in a way that I never would have been able to create my own personal business, and also to just gather so much more insight. Because when you do business stories on the regular news, it's personal finance.
Yes.
So to really be able to interview CEOs, and sometimes it was like the material was really dry.
Yeah.
I would say, if I don't have Ambien, I could borrow this person because there'll be some sort of economist or something that is not meant to necessarily share it for a wider audience. But at the same time, I think there's nothing more exciting than business leaders and what they're doing. I learned that there.
And because you think that, I guess that really shows in everything that you do. Like people can feel that.
I think that when I used to do more personal news where I interview people about personal tragedies in their life. That's a lot on the American morning shows.
Sure.
And I was always so shocked by how people would tell me so much.
Yes. And
I didn't understand what I was doing that was making them open up to me so grandly and, hold my hand and welcome me into their family. And I think it was just the genuine fact that you can't fake if you actually care. So they can just tell. Humans can tell if you're listening. They can tell if you care. They can tell if you are just doing a job, or if you are tearing up on your own, or if you're genuinely excited about learning about their business. Everyone can just tell.
And do you have a personality that makes you, because like you said, if you have to be genuine, that means you generally care and you're generally interested. Do you have a personality that makes you genuinely interested? Is that something you have to tell yourself every time? Or like, how do you become genuinely interested in everything?
I think that's a personality type.
It's just a personality. You're sort of quote unquote born with it, grew up with it, etc.
I've always asked a million questions. See, I'm uncomfortable being the interviewee. I'm almost
totally feel
bad at it. I'm so used to always asking the questions. I never get interviewed. No one asks me anything.
Why is that uncomfortable for you? Is that because you're not in control?
Maybe I haven't formulated my personal story, right? Because I'm so busy working on everyone else's.
Well, everyone else's. And I guess you're still developing it.
Right now.
Yeah, in life in general, right? I find it, because I can totally, like if you're used to being in control, I can totally relate to that. I find it like when I go into an interview and interview somebody for a job, and if that guy turns it around and starts to interview me, which is completely fair, like it's out of context for me, it's out of my normal comfort zone, I actually find that very difficult. And so I can totally relate. You're so used to being the one asking the questions that.
And I have a million questions, so
and I know you do because you're interested. You're interested the other way around.
But I also am a private person, so I think that that's also a personality trait, right? If you don't feel like sharing everything with everyone.
Did you take an education to end up where you are today? Oh, and is it required for that matter? If somebody wants to copy what you've done, which is unbelievably difficult to do, and you've had an amazing career. I
had a wonderful education at Columbia University's journalism school, where they did not teach us the broadcast side of things, which a lot of journalism schools do, teach you the technical side of things. There was some of that as well, but it was really about coming up with your story, finding truth in your story, finding passion in your story, realizing how many journalists are constantly making so many mistakes and how important it is to try 110% not to. And I think that foundation has been extremely helpful throughout my career.
So, and if there's somebody sitting here saying, let's say I was starting out my career and said, look, what you've done is unbelievable. I want to try everything I can to do the same thing. First of all, can I? Is there a lot of luck involved? And how would you sort of give me the steps to end up in a similar situation as you have, being able to work with some of the best networks in the world?
I think you really have to do it. And so when we were leaving school, a lot of people went to go work at the networks and get a job at the networks. But unless you've been the reporter, it's very hard to transition into that role. So I moved to a small town in North Carolina, and I just did it, and I was terrible. And you moved there just for that? Oh, yeah. Actually, I sent out 200 tapes around the country, and no one called me back except Missoula, Montana, and said that the salary was very low, but the good news was I would still be eligible for food stamps.
Sorry.
So I didn't get that job, and I cried. I was down to 2 candidates. I was so excited to move to Missoula, Montana, which I had read one, lost article that said it was the new Paris. And I got one in Wilmington, North Carolina, and that's how I got my start. But that's where I was able to make all my mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's where I was able to just go and do a story every single day and just get that out of my system until I had some sort of experience. And then I went back to a very, very small network in New York where they make you be the camera person as well.
Yeah.
A one-man band. It's called New York One News. And you have to drive the car and sometimes very dangerous neighborhoods by yourself.
Nothing
with
fancy
expensive
about
camera
it.
equipment. It was so, it was incredibly laborious. It was manual labor. Carrying the camera equipment, carrying the lights, carrying the batteries, trying to do the whole thing yourself. I mean, that's a job for 3 people. And also cameras have gotten a lot smaller.
And could you be excited about it at that point? We're like, I've made it, like I'm excited?
I was so excited, and I thought I completely had made it.
Yeah.
I was on television in New York. That was so cool to me. And that part of it was very cool to me. I'm going to sound like I'm 100, but then September 11th happened, and we were on the scene, and maybe 2 months passed without a day off, because there was real information that New Yorkers needed to know that we had to give them, and it was 24 hours a day, where to find their lost loved ones, where, which trains were closed. I mean, people were glued to their local 24-hour news. And all of a sudden it clicked to me about work having like a really higher purpose. And I had always thought oh my God, this is such a cool, neat job. But to get to that point, to realize that, oh no, this is like really essential and has value. And it made me feel profoundly different about the career.
But I know 9/11 had an incredible impact just on people who were in New York all together, covering it at the same time, having to get so close emotionally to the stories. I mean, could you distance yourself like a doctor who works in a hospital with clients, or was that, that must have been very emotionally tough for you?
I could not distance myself at all. I cried hysterically several times on television, live from many firefighters' funerals at once, or there were a couple times, and it was okay. For some reason, at that time, it was okay. But no, I'm terrible at distancing myself. Which is a pro, because I feel like people, like I said, think that you're genuine because they see that you genuinely care. But it can also be a con because you get wrapped up in it.
So you were just on 20 hours a day, and wow, I can feel
time.
it just you telling me.
And I was I was really young, so it was a really special time.
It must have been. And so, wow, I can feel that inside, because I know people. I have somebody from Denmark that I know who is a journalist who was there and happened to be asked to cover part of it. She was there on holiday, and I just know how much that impacted her, and she was not even close as much as you were doing there. So you're doing that. You found out how much it actually matters and the purpose in what you do in journalism.
And right now, it really matters too. When I'm anchoring the news.
Yes.
The political climate in America is next level charged. I don't know how else to describe it. So I feel like it's really important that we have all the information we can get to people about the candidates, about what's happening in the White House, because there's so much misinformation out there.
Yes.
So that's almost a moral calling now.
Can you be unbiased as news reporter?
I feel like it's no longer required, because
it's
things
no longer
are so
required.
Off the rails. I try, but I don't think that anyone expects you to be 100% unbiased anymore.
Do people want unbiased stories? I'm sometimes in doubt. Like, I know somebody who she was an editor for a newspaper, and she ended up creating a book publisher where she writes books that are trying to be unbiased, that are actually trying to write the full story. And so, for example, they wrote a story on Erdogan saying, look, everything that we know about Erdogan is bad, but actually, there are people who vote for him, so not everything is bad. Let's try to actually write a nuanced story about that. But it seems like people don't want that. And particularly the more the Facebook news feed matters, the more we want polarized stories that matches how we feel.
Yes, and that's the echo chamber that caused the election to happen. Everyone's listening to themselves, and they don't know that there are other opinions out there. And that actually is really what's polarizing politics. And it's not just in the U.S., it's globally.
It's globally, 100%. So it's almost it's not even, whether or not you're supposed to be unbiased today. It's even, can you be? Like, would that even be acceptable? Because the news channels end up, pushing a certain kind of story as well. Because that sticks more with people. I feel like we want to see blacks and whites more than we want to see shades of gray.
Absolutely. And the stakes are high, and there's just too many channels, right? So with the internet, there's just too many newscasters. So to set yourself apart, being unbiased vanilla is going to not last in people's memories.
So zooming back,
it's hard to find a place to get your actual news.
It is very hard.
Yeah. I know. I struggle sometimes because I'm trying to prep, and I'm like, I don't even
know where to read. No.
Yeah. I mean, I just try to read everything and then make my own opinions, but.
And the tries that I've seen to create those unbiased news have actually not managed to build enough size. I mean, it's actually difficult to, we're all complaining about this, but at the same time, when those outlets actually do get created, like, they don't get the subscribers.
I have been asked. I have been asked to media train at several startups who have said, we think that there's a market for this kind of news where we spend really a lot of time on the stories. And I'm like, sounds dreamy. And they can't get it off the ground. Yeah.
No, it's incredible. And so it's almost like in Excel, it would give you sort of a problem thing because it's a circular reference to some degree, right? And everybody expects somebody else to solve it in a way because everybody's saying, well, the news should be going more deep and everything else, but then they don't buy the news that does that, and so it's
100%. And your boss is not rewarding you for that necessarily. Because they're looking at the ratings.
Of course.
Yeah.
And he has to survive on
and
his ratings.
And it's a business,
right?
and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
And that's what I tell people. They get so morally offended. I'm like, they're running a business. I mean, if it's not making money, then everyone loses their job.
And I guess that's, 100%. I guess that's a challenge.
Or if it's not hemorrhaging money is really more accurately way to describe a lot of the media companies out there.
In the state that it is at today. And so going back to that idea we were talking about before of wanting to end up in a similar scenario as you have, because obviously, I mean, that's a lot of people's dream, I guess, to end up where you are. And
things have changed so much, though. So now anyone can be a citizen journalist with a podcast or a YouTube, and you can really make a voice for yourself with subscribers, and they're turning into mainstream successes right and left. I mean, everyone. They're offering book deals for books based on your social media platform and how many followers you have. So everything is being sort of sold in reverse. They're coming up with TV shows based around YouTube stars. So young people, if they wanted to be a journalist on their own, they could just try to just do it because there's so many more outlets now.
So the young version of you, just coming out of university now is starting, would they go more in a social media direction?
I'm just such a rule follower. I like structure. I like working for a boss that sets a high bar and learning by failing and by trying to get someone's approval.
That was very honest. Like, that was super insightful about yourself.
It's true. I know. I wish it wasn't like that.
No, but you started out saying you
don't
like,
shoes.
But it's funny, you started out saying you don't like to reveal that much about yourself, and then yet that's a really interesting statement right there.
Yeah, so I think it's a personality type that is really great in that medium.
Yeah.
That feels 100% comfortable sharing everything and, wanting so badly for people to listen.
Sorry, I'm going to grab more into that. I'm not going to let you off that easily because I think that's interesting, knowing that much about yourself and what you're looking for. Actually admitting to yourself that, look, I want a boss who sets the highest standard and something to run after and all those things. Like, has that always been clear? Do you find you have a lot of self-insight? Do you understand yourself very well? Is that some conclusion you've come to over time?
I think now I understand myself very well because time has passed and I've had many different bosses and many different jobs, and I've really sort of seen different working environments, and I like really high standards. That gets me excited. That gets me passionate. I like to have goals.
You want a boss who sets a high standard for you. That's
100%.
interesting. And I think a lot of
That's
people.
how you learn. I can't teach
agree.
myself.
Somebody needs to go and set that bar. Though a lot of leaders find that difficult because the employees don't like it 365 days a year. It's not every time your boss comes in with a high standard that you probably love him for. I'm sure there are times where, like, you know, right now you're lacking energy, or you feel like you've done your best, or whatever it is. There must be times you don't, or.
I had a journalism teacher that made me cry and was so mean to me. And then when I graduated, I got this award, and it's like a long time ago, but this just made me think of it, for the best broadcast video that we had made. And I said, "You hated me, what?" And I think she took me out for drinks afterwards. And I said, "But you were so mean to me all year." And she goes, "That's because you had so much potential."
Yeah.
So I think that, yes, of course, I think that people are being soft then.
Yes.
If they don't like their boss setting high standards for them 365 days a year and being mean to them. Yes, you need to be praised sometimes, or you're not going to be motivated.
Do you like praise?
Everyone likes praise.
Everyone likes praise? I don't like praise.
You don't like any
No.
praise? Don't you want to be say, like, that's a job well done. You really did something great here.
The issue is, and this is a problem of my psychology, is honestly, I feel like it's manipulative. And I know it's like, that's fucked up, and I know that's like in my mind and everything else, but I have a hard time differentiating. Plus, even growing up, I always went into my boss and I said, "Look, tell me what I don't do well." Always. And whenever they start in the good stuff, I'll be like, "That's fine. Let's talk about what I don't do well."
That's how you've achieved so much. No, I find that obviously more an interesting part of the conversation. Yes. No, of course. You want to know what you can do better.
Have you ever had bosses that didn't set the bar high enough?
Oh, completely. Where I'm like, who is running this?
And because I find that fascinating, because there is a modern day belief that a leader should just like step back and leave people be and all those things, right? And I actually think there are different leaders that are good for different types of people in different types of situations. But I think a lot of people are running around thinking that leadership is not about setting the bar high. Actually, I usually say that you can, as a leader, if you say you deliver yourself on 100%, you have three options. You can demand 100% from other people, you can demand 80%, and you can demand 120%. And I'm surprised by how many leaders who actually demand 80% from their people because it's unfair to demand a lot. Whereas my example is, I always say any football coach probably expects his players to be much better than he is. He wants them to grow into their potential rather than being the soft, nice person.
Right. I like that.
So it's really good to know for a lot of people, I think, that there are people like you and to some degree me out there who actually says, "Look, I want bosses who set high expectations to me."
I think it's also clarity. I mean, I think that there's a lot of opaque leadership and people who don't clearly dictate what they want and expect you to sort of come up with it on your own. I think clear vision, clear articulation, no office politics or allowing that to go on, and really taking a role of saying, this is how we do things. And if you do something duplicitous in my workplace, you're fired. Like,
yes.
Throw out the garbage. Don't just allow shenanigans to go on. I don't know. I find there's a lot of muck that gets in the way of just being productive and doing good work. And I'm not a big office chit-chatter.
No, I could imagine.
I do it, but I think it's like a huge waste of time.
You're focused on getting the work done.
Sure.
Yeah. We do a lot of personality tests with people. It's a big belief that we have that we are extremely biased in interview processes, and actually building tests up front are actually a way to uncover some of that bias because you become conscious about the choices you're making. And there is a general interest difference between people who are very good at charming people and very sort of forthcoming and nice and stuff, but who at the same time are very productive because they're interested in the person, they're interested in the relationship, but they're also interested in the goal and the target. And then people who are all about the relationship and all they want to do is they just want to nurture that relationship. And I guess in your situation, if you just nurture relationships, you have to be careful when you interview someone that it doesn't come about making them feel good, because you also have a goal. You also want to get to the story. Do you sometimes find a conflict between wanting to get to the story and like maintaining that relationship with that person?
Yeah, no, I feel tremendous guilt if the story doesn't go. I'm not in full control of how the story is going to turn out as well. And Yeah, I feel tremendous guilt if if I've ingratiated myself to them and it doesn't go exactly the way they would have hoped. And a lot of times it doesn't. I mean, people can't
Some people must have left the studio like feeling like you're not the nicest person in the world, or like,
I think I think that most people are savvy enough that they think, you know what, that there was a curveball in there, but I think overall that was pretty fair.
Okay.
I think that's how you want them leaving.
Do you think that's a way about the way that you do it that makes them feel
100%? I'm not unfair. I am not. I'm driven, but not so driven as to like lose my morals along the way.
No.
I don't care that much about breaking some big story if it means that I'm going to have to be a bad person.
Yeah. But that must be challenging because there are people in your industry who don't feel that way.
Absolutely. In fact, that's what drives them.
Yeah.
That's their bread and butter, is making people feel uncomfortable or exposing something that someone's done wrong.
So if you, switching gears for a second, so you mentioned earlier a lot of people are using social media today. Everybody can do some version of being a presenter today, on their own show on YouTube or any other social channel out there. How does someone become as good as you at this? And if you're listening to this, you don't see how good you are at being present and presenting yourself and everything else, but you can see that online. If you look at YouTube, it's very clear. But like, how does somebody become as talented as you are?
Thank you.
At this?
Gosh, I really don't know. I really do think it's practice. I think it's just doing it over and over again until you feel comfortable, and just really feeling comfortable and owning the situation.
It's starting at that small.
Like I said, I don't have a ton of experience being interviewed, so this is choppy.
I can see that.
Than when I am interviewing others, because I can always come up with questions to ask without thinking about it. This, I really have to pause and reflect because I haven't done it a million times before.
Yeah. But it's doing it a lot of times.
I think so. I really do. Well, you also get a wealth of knowledge doing it a lot of times. So if you have interviewed, 10 people like this, then you can go back into that wealth of knowledge. And that's why I think someone young can't just come, otherwise they could just hire models and put a show on. You have to have context to be able to ask questions that make sense and resonate, I think.
When you look at the first, do you ever look at the first recordings that you did when you went?
I don't. I should. I have a whole box. I'm sure that.
Okay. Do you think it's very different than how you are today?
I'm uncomfortable watching myself now, and then I don't. It's hard to watch yourself.
Because I think a lot of people, I guess, would go into this and say, "I want to be as good as you are today," rather than knowing and understanding there was a road to get there, and knowing that without having seen it, sometimes people look like a deer in the headlights on the first couple of tries.
For me, it was the first 100. And I do think there's some people who are really natural at it. I've had one or two. I think I started in media training because younger girls at work, my boss would say, "Can you sit down with them?" or whatever, and I would coach them and I would sit them in the room to prepare them for their first go. And they would get up there, and I'd say, "You've surpassed me already." I mean, some people are just so naturally gifted at speaking fluidly, and those are not the people who need my media training. Yeah, those people just knock my socks off. There are people who are born with it.
We're just naturals, but the rest of the world is not, and we need training.
But there's so many people who think that they could never speak well in front of a crowd or on television, and that's simply not true.
Are there any a friend of mine who works in a big private equity fund, he wanted to become a better leader. And so he thought a lot about what to do, and he went and took improvisational acting classes.
Totally. I did the same thing.
Oh, you did the same thing? Really?
Absolutely. I didn't even think about that. Yes. It was really fun and so interesting. I feel like I should go back. But there were so many things, that you learned that you can't articulate, that just that are almost very visceral. By putting on a play, for example, as an adult. I did that kind of thing when I was a child, but having to make yourself that uncomfortable as an adult.
Which very rarely happens, right? It's like when we were a kid, we dare to, bruise our knees, we dare to hurt, ourselves in a way that's not permanent. We dare to try new sports, all those things. But as we get older, it's kind of we get afraid to make an ass of ourselves sometimes, to embarrass ourselves a bit.
And not people in an improvisational acting class. And I also thought everyone would be 18, trying to make it in the big city. And it wasn't. There were 65-year-olds. Like, there was just all sorts of people who are just trying to be actors, that they just love it, or, trying to be better in whatever their career is, like this private equity guy.
Yeah. So very clear, take improvisational acting classes. It was actually funny, when I was at MIT, there was a class about leadership, and part of that was actually improvisational acting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because the idea was that, what do you really do as a leader? I mean, there's a bunch of different elements to it, but a big part of it is convincing people of a story, right? It's actually getting people to say, hey, we want to go and build this. Let's go and make it happen. And so to make them run in that direction, they have to believe. And that's a big part of improvisational acting, is you have to make people believe in whatever is happening.
That's really interesting. And you have to believe it. I mean, more than anything, you have to, and I tell that to people too, if you're not excited about what you're talking about, no one else is going to. You have to mean it.
100%. And are there other things other than that you would recommend somebody who wants to sort of learn? Are there any other courses that you've done, books to read, or is it just turning on the camera and trying? Is it watching you and saying, I want to emulate and copy as much as I can, and learning from that? Were the people that you watch where you say, like, oh, she smiles that way, or she does this?
Oh, no, it's none of that. Absolutely not. No, I think that would be a mistake to try to emulate anyone.
Okay.
I really do think that you have to find a way to interview people.
Yes.
Even, no matter how small, I mean, there's a million tiny publications, but you have to find a way to actually do. Mm-hmm. And so I know you can learn a lot at things like President Summit, listening to leaders, but in my particular field, I think you have to, it's just repetition.
It's just repetition, it's just trying it.
Just trying it. Anywhere, any publication, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be great on your resume. It's just about having that experience of thinking, of really listening to people, because you can't be thinking of what your next question is, because you have to hear what their answer is. So I can prepare my questions, but they could answer something totally out of left field, and if you don't follow that, it's a terrible interview.
And I think that's really difficult for a lot of people, but I guess that requires that you're both into your material and what you're trying to achieve out of this interview, but present at the same time. That's difficult for a lot of people. I feel like a lot of journalists are asking the next question they have on their list rather than actually listening to the answer and trying to go off from that.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see. A lot of times I ask the prepared questions that I have because it makes sense and it works in context.
Yeah.
But if they say something provocative, you can't just let it go.
That's part of the reason why I almost feel like I know too much about you going into this, because I actually wanted to know less. I wanted to unpeel the onion together with whoever is listening or watching, right? Because otherwise you end up, sometimes if you know too much, you also end up jumping over information, which is important for other people to get to that conclusion.
But also it's such a weird picture of you online. You can't always control what goes to the top or what's out there. And people will ask me about a story. I'm like, is that on there? I don't even know. I remember doing that. So you can't fully control the social media picture that is presented.
And if somebody watches this or listens in and says, look, amazing, I want to get media training from you. I want to be better at it, because, maybe startup entrepreneurs, there may be people running business at other stages, and they're just saying, look, being able to understand and tell our story better, I guess both internally and externally, it's a really important part of what we do. Is there any way they can reach out to you?
Email Gigi@stonewoodsmedia.com.
Gigi@stonewoodsmedia.com.
Yeah.
Very easy. Anything else?
So easy. No, but it's really like what you're saying. It's media message writing.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So nice
amazing.
to meet you.